Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. I hope you guys are all doing really well. So apologies for not posting anything last weekend. I entirely had intentions of posting last weekend on Sunday like I usually do, but Matthew and I were out celebrating my birthday most of the weekend, and we were just having such a good time. So, you know, we went out, we did all the things, and it was a really great time. I'm an introvert, as you guys know, so to have a whole weekend that was kind of filled with just celebration and shopping and going to a movie and all the things, it was a really great change of pace. So by the time I was done with that, I was just super exhausted and I didn't get my video out. So again, apologies for that, and maybe I'll, in our next tea and a chat, maybe I'll go over what we did for my birthday, what we bought, the movie that we saw, which I didn't enjoy. So if you guys are interested in that, let me know down below. It is a new series I started on the channel, the Tea and a Chat, just talking about things that are going on in life and Halloween and things that I'm buying, witchy things, all that sort of thing that's kind of outside of the book world. But for today, I wanted to, I don't know why I got this idea, but I wanted to do kind of a top 10 list of books that I've read that have been really super emotional. So a lot of horror does have emotional aspects in it as well, but these books are the ones that stick out in my mind that I either full on shed a tear or it was just super sad. And when I think about emotional horror, these ones definitely stick out of my head. So if you guys are interested in that, then we're gonna hop right into the top 10 list. So the first one that I have, I believe I read this at the end of last year with E.D. Lewis reviews, and we read The Midnight Club by Christopher Pike. And as most of you know, Christopher Pike is one of my favorite authors. He was my favorite author growing up, and I remember reading The Midnight Club back in the day, but for some reason I couldn't remember a whole lot about it. So when I reread it, it was like reading it for the first time. And I don't know if it's because I'm a little bit older and experienced a lot of death and stuff like that for myself. Maybe that's why it hit me a lot harder now than it did when I was growing up. So this book absolutely tore me to pieces. I don't think I will ever read it again. It's heart-wrenching and it's gut-wrenching and it's sad and it's all the things. But Christopher Pike has this really interesting way of looking at horror in a different, kind of from a different viewpoint than a lot of other authors. And some people wouldn't consider this horror at all because it doesn't have a whole lot of horrific elements in it. But because of the subject matter that it deals with, I still do consider this horror. So let me know if you guys would consider, if you've read it, The Midnight Club, actually horror. But if you don't know about the book, it's basically, it takes place in a hospice, and all of these kids have cancer and they form a midnight club and they tell spooky stories, and they have an idea that whoever passes away, they're hoping that they'll reach back to the rest of the club members to let them know if there's an afterlife. And like I said, this book is completely heart-wrenching, and there could be an argument made whether this is horror or not, but to me, the subject matter is the horrors of real life. You have a bunch of teenagers that are suffering from a fatal disease, and it's just heart-wrenching. So this one definitely makes this list. So I did want to let you guys know that this is not a countdown list, so this is just 10 books that I find were really emotional. So these are ones that I have actually read, or one on here is what I'm currently reading, but this is not a countdown list, so just wanted to put that in there. And next up on the list is one from one of my favorite authors, Mandy by Stephanie Sparks. And this one came out last summer, and I gobbled it up in, I believe, a day. And this was one of my favorite books of 2022, and it is gruesome and just over the top with the kills and everything, and it's jaw-dropping, and some of the subject matter, like there's definitely trigger warnings in this book, but the underlying current of the story is very tragic. It really is. And if you don't know anything about this book, it's about this girl, her name is Mandy, and her father either owns or works for a funeral home. And you know, so she's been around a lot of death her whole life and everything, and she has a particular special power, and she can basically bring people back from the dead. So that's not a spoiler, it's right on the back of the book. And so one night, late at night, they get a knock at the door, and Mandy answers, and there's a guy there. He's really upset because his friend has just been killed in a car accident, and he's like, you know, the rumor around town is that you can bring people back, but they're not prepared for what Mandy brings back. And so then they have to deal with that consequence. And like I said, it's completely over the top. It's super gory and bloody. It's fast paced. There's lots of twists and turns. It's a super short book, so you could definitely read this in a couple of days. But the underlying current of this whole thing has a really sad aspect to it. And that, I think, really kind of got to me. And I think that's why I would put that on the emotional horror list. Next up on the list is actually a middle grade book, and that is The Dollhouse Murders by Betty Wren Wright. And this book really surprised me with how, just the subject matter and how gruesome it is. But basically it's about this young girl, and she goes to spend the summer with her aunt, and she really likes this aunt. She hasn't met her a whole lot, but she goes to spend the summer in kind of a family-owned home. And up in the attic there's a dollhouse, and the dollhouse is pretty creepy, and things seem to move around on their own, and she can't really figure it out. Her aunt discovers that she's found the dollhouse, so when she starts asking about it, you know, her aunt is very standoffish, so there's kind of like a family secret. And the story at the center of this book, again, is really heart-wrenching, and it's kind of like a family situation that they really don't want to talk about. And then of course, as this young girl is pressing her aunt for information, the whole thing kind of unravels and comes out. And this was like, it was definitely spooky for what you would consider a middle grade book, but it was really surprising to me. It was super short. Like I said, it was a middle grade, but I loved it from cover to cover. It was great. And the story at the center will just, you know, it'll make you get a hitch in your throat. So if you haven't ever read any Betty Wren Wright, which I believe I read one of her other books, but it was a long time ago, and I'm excited to pick up more of hers. So if you guys want to give her a try as well, let me know, or if you like this author, because I think this book was definitely written well, and if her other books have these kind of underlying stories, I'm definitely gonna love them. Next up on the list is one that I read this year, a classic actually. It is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. And this story, you know, like I said, it's a classic. Everybody knows about, you know, the picture that keeps aging, but Dorian Gray himself doesn't. And I won't go too much into the story, of course, but a lot of people, most people, I think, most horror lovers have definitely read this one. But this year I've been going back and reading a lot of classics that I've never gotten to. Haven't read this book before. And this one I read as part of the Gothic Hearts Reading Challenge back in February. It was kind of like a Valentine's Day themed Gothic horror readathon, and I love this book so much, and it's such a tragic story. Like, it's one of those ones, it's very much like a Shakespearean kind of tragedy where just nothing goes right. And there's one particular story in here that it just really hit me super hard. So the whole book is a tragedy, and there's nothing happy about it whatsoever, but there's one section that it just really got me in the feels, and it definitely made me emotional when I was reading it. So if you're looking to read more of the classics, if you haven't gotten to pick up any classics, this is definitely one that I would recommend. Like I said, I loved it from cover to cover, and it's one of those books that sticks in your head. You know, I wouldn't put it on my favorites of the year list, but is definitely like beautifully written. The story is fantastic. It's not long, and just the underlying stories within the main story they're super tragic. So definitely had to put this one on the list. And next up is another Gothic horror that I read this year. I have to say, I've been really into Gothic horror this year. I'm currently reading another one right now, and I'm just enthralled. So this one is The Witch of Willow Hall by Hester Fox. It's another one that I read as part of the Gothic Hearts Reading Challenge. And Hester Fox is very quickly becoming, you know, just eking her way up on my favorite authors of the year or favorite authors of all time list, because her stories are just so deep and they have so many layers and everything. So if you're into Gothic horror, and looking for something that's kind of a little bit out of the norm, and you want all of those spooky atmospheric sort of feels, I would definitely recommend this one. So this is about a family who moves to basically a country house, and something had happened. They were from Boston, something happened, and there was a scandal around the family, and they basically had to move away from Boston into a summer house that obviously was only meant to be used for the summer for like aristocratic families, but they had to go out there permanently. And there's kind of like the picture of Dorian Gray. There's so many different storylines going on, and a lot of them were very, very tragic. So you've kind of got this situation with the parents. They're very aloof, and then these two, so there's three sisters. There's also a brother as well, but he's not part of the story. So there's three sisters, and the two eldest sisters, like, they hate each other. They really, really do. And so there's this family strife kind of undercurrent going on in here, or storyline kind of going on in here. And then there's a family tragedy that happens while they're at this summer house as well. And just the situation that happens is so sad, and just the grief that this family is going to, and with one of the sisters in particular, she's going through so much grief, and then she starts to experience a haunting out in this place. And there's, you know, the eldest sister especially is trying to marry into a good family, and so there's kind of like bickering and fighting going on with like the sisters and these men, and like the whole thing is just very tragic and sad, like just sad storylines. But I was enthralled with this book, and like I said, if you're into that gothic kind of atmospheric sort of story that has all of the wonderful gothic elements but also a really, really good tragic storyline, this is definitely one that I would recommend. I love this book. I believe I gave it a full 5 stars. And next up is The Haunting by Alex Bell. And as you guys know, Frozen Charlotte is one of my favorite books of all time. I love those books, that and its sequel, Charlotte Says. So I picked up the entire Red Eye series as a Yule gift to myself last year, and The Haunting was the next one after Frozen Charlotte that I had picked up. And it was written really, really well. I wouldn't say that I loved it as much as I love the Frozen Charlotte duology, but it was still super, super good. And if you're looking for that tragic horror, this one is definitely going to deliver. It kind of revolves around this teenage girl who is living in, you know, a big city, but as a child she was living kind of in a smaller community or town, and her grandmother owned an inn called the Water Witch, and it was a cursed inn because it was built from the timber of an old ship that had a lot of tragic history. And then of course the inn itself is super haunted, and it has a curse and everything, and she ends up having an accident, and she's now wheelchair bound, which I love that element in this story because it really adds to, like, you know, she can't just run away from whatever she's experiencing. And I really, really like that aspect. So of course, you know, there's this tragic accident that happens. So now she's a teenager, and her grandmother is in a home. She wants to go visit her before she dies. And so she goes out and visits the grandmother, and the grandmother is like, whatever you do, don't stay in the Water Witch. You know, it's cursed, it's haunted, this whole thing. So we're dealing with a haunting. But she also reconnects with this brother and sister that she used to be friends with before, and their whole storyline is just so sad, and it's wrapped into this whole haunting story in the cursed inn, and she's in a wheelchair after a tragic accident. And then there's one situation that happens in this book that pissed me off so much. I bawled my eyes out. I threw the book across the room. Matt was like, what the heck is going on? And it really hit me hard because of a situation that I was going through in my own life. So I won't say anything about what it was, but it just hit me so hard. I bawled my eyes out. I don't think I picked up the book for a whole week, and couldn't stop thinking about it. So this is definitely a tragic one that I've read this year. Like I said, it's not as good as the Frozen Charlotte series, but it's still pretty good. Next up on the list is Thornhill by Pam Smye, and this is a really interesting book because just the way it's written is very unique. So it's a dual timeline, And it's kind of hard to explain, but one timeline in the book is this young girl moves into a house, and I believe behind her or next door or something is this old crumbly orphanage called Thornhill. And she starts to unravel a little bit of mystery that had happened there, and she finds a journal. And then, so we're reading the journal entries from a young girl who was an orphan at Thornhill. And so this story is kind of unraveling of what happened there, and it's also heavily illustrated, and the illustrations are really, really good, and they really add to the story. But the whole situation that happens with this orphan at Thornhill is heart-wrenching. This was, I think I put this one on my favorites of 2022 as well, because it was just, it blew me away. This is so good. I haven't read anything else from Pam Smythe, but this book just really hit me in all the feels. It was so tragic. It was so sad. I did cry while I was reading it, and I would highly recommend, if you haven't read this one, to definitely pick it up. And I didn't even realize until I was doing this list how many books came out of that Gothic Hearts reading challenge that I did in February. So we've had The Picture of Dorian Gray, The Witch of Willow Hall, and now I want to talk about Rebecca, that I also read back during February, the Gothic Hearts reading challenge. I believe this one carried into March, actually. It was kind of a bridge book. I read this one on audio as well. The audiobook is fantastic because you really get that emotion that's coming through. The narrator did a fantastic job, and I actually like the audiobook even better than the movie, because I did actually watch the movie with Laurence Olivier after I read the book. And this story is super, super tragic as well, and like I said, you get that raw emotion coming through. And so this one is about a young girl, and she basically meets and marries an older man, and he brings her back to his estate that's called Manderley, and he is a widower. And his first wife, Rebecca, her whole personality and the ghost of her memory just haunts this new young mistress, and she's having problems trying to escape it. And then of course, as the story goes along, you have housekeepers that don't really like this new young mistress. She doesn't know what she's doing, and all of these secrets come out, and it's super sad, it's tragic, and you understand kind of why Maxim is the way he is. And then we have this whole power shift that goes on for this young girl. So it's very emotional in that, you know, it's sad when the story starts to unravel, but also just the feminism, the switch in kind of the power struggle and the power switch, her trying to deal with the memory of his old wife and how she's dealing with that. It's just wonderfully atmospheric, and this is another one I enjoyed from beginning to end. And like I said, I would highly, highly recommend you read this one on audiobook if you haven't picked it up yet. Next up on the list is a vengeful witch story. So I have Maggies Grave by David Sodergren, and this one, you know, it's one of those books that's been sitting on my shelf forever, and I finally picked it up, and it just blew me out of the water. So it is a vengeful witch story. It is like blood, guts, and gore, with this witch trying to hunt down these teenage kids who have basically brought her back from the past. But the storyline with Maggie, so the witch that they bring back, is heart-wrenching. It's so heart-wrenching. And then that kind of storyline sort of bridges over into what's happening in present day. It's a huge spoiler, so I won't say anything. But both storylines are super sad, and it definitely has that visceral kind of reaction as well. So I love those books that, you know, it has all of those horror elements. It's fast-paced, there's action, blood, guts, and gore, but then it has this undercurrent of this super sad story. So I think this one is definitely underappreciated. I haven't heard a whole lot of people talking about Maggie's Grave, but this one, you know, I gave it a full 5 stars. I think I read it in 2 days, and I couldn't stop thinking about it after I was done. And then the last book on the list is one that I'm reading right now. So another classic that I've never picked up before is Carrie by Stephen King. And of course, I've seen the movie 100 times, you know, since I was a teenager, but only recently picked up the book. I'm trying to, like I said, trying to read more gothic horror and more horror classics this year. And I'm reading this one on audio as well. So again, you get that full kind of emotion with Carrie, kind of like the dynamic between Carrie and her mother. Of course, everybody knows the synopsis of this book, but it's really hitting me really hard. And of course, you have that religious aspect in here that's kind of carrying through my religious horror kick that I've been on lately. So it's offering all of the feels, and it definitely has that deep emotional kind of gut-wrenching situation going on with Carrie and how she's being treated. And even in the opening scenes where she's in the bathroom or in the showers with the girls in school, you know, and then of course you get this whole layer in the book that isn't in the movie. And that's something like the same thing as I read with The Exorcist, that, you know, it has this whole deeper layer and deeper meaning that the movie doesn't have. So I think that's why I'm enjoying it so much, and it's hitting me so hard because there's more emotion to the story than they even put in the movie. So really enjoying that one. So I'm hoping that as I continue to read it, it's gonna stay on this list of my favorite emotional horror. So there you guys go. That is my list of emotional or sad horror. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know down below what are the books that hit you really hard in the horror genre and made you cry or made you have a strong reaction to. I'd really love to hear your answers. But until next time, stay spooky, everybody. Bye.